Alberta's government has implemented mandatory literacy and numeracy assessments for students in grades 1 to 3. These assessments help identify students who are at risk of falling behind in their learning and development. Assessing students in their early years provides essential information to teachers, parents, and government about potential student learning issues and needs, and ensures students at risk get the help they need sooner. The government has provided the following assessments in French and English for school authorities to use: the letter name sound or LENS assessment, and the Castles and Coulthart 3 or CC3 assessment. These assessments and the government's initiative to make them mandatory are based on several research studies showing the benefits of early screening, including research conducted by Dr. Georgiou and Dr. Rauno Parrila. Dr. Alain Desrochers led the development of the French language versions of these assessments. For this video, we asked Dr. Georgiou and Dr. Parrila to help explain what makes an assessment effective.
I am Dr. Georgiou. I'm a professor at the Faculty of Education at the University of Alberta. I am also a member of the UNESCO Canada Working Group in Education and a member of the College of the Royal Society of Canada.
I am Dr. Rauno Parrila. I'm a professor of education in Australian Catholic University, and I am the director of Australian Centre for the Advancement of Literacy. Absolutely, all three categories are important. The three lists of words assess slightly different kinds of skills. However, from the point of view of early word reading skills, the absolutely critical skill is learning to read regular words. So we're using regular words as the main criteria for being identified as at risk. To sort of cross-validate that decision, we are then saying that you need to be at risk also either in non-word reading or in exception word reading. The only reason for that is that when you're assessing very young children, they sometimes lose their concentration at some part of the tasks but do much better in other part of the tasks. So we want to take away the option that this particular child just lost their concentration on regular words but was actually able to read the non-words or the irregular words. In those cases, the regular word reading score would not be entirely accurate. So that's why we ask for the second one. Now, that's good for the early reading development. If you use the same task on the later grades, what will end up happening is that the regular word reading will hit a ceiling. Many children will be able to read all words correctly. So that no longer works very well. Well, you can still use it as an at-risk assessment tool because the kids who don't get to that ceiling are still struggling. But you also now need to pay a little bit more attention to the exception word reading because those are skills that children are really supposed to develop while they learn new material in school. If you think of the history of English language, the exception words come mainly from two different kinds of sources. So you have the old English words that may be of Norse origin or may be of Saxon origin. Those are the very, very frequent words. I think we have one in that list. So the word one as the number one. Why that is an exception word is that over time its pronunciation has changed. It used to be pronounced as rhyming with alone, so it was pronounced as own. But then with the vowel changes and everything else, the pronunciation changed to one. Or the word two, the number two, why does it have the W in it that is not pronounced? Well, originally the W in it was pronounced, and it was pronounced as tvo. But then the pronunciation of O moved into U, and tvu is very difficult to pronounce. So the W pronunciation was dropped. So the very frequent exception words in English often have that kind of origin. When you go to less frequent English, exception words in English, they are often loan words from other languages. The three languages that English has loaned most words are French, Latin, and Greek. Almost all the Latin and Greek words are regular, so they're not exception words. But if you look at French words, very large number of them maintained parts of the French spelling and part of the French pronunciation, so they turned out to be exception words. So if you then go and try to find, and so if you look at the structure of the exception word list in CC3, it goes from very frequent words to much less frequent words. And when you go to less frequent exception words, you're bound to run into many French words. Just simply the structure of language, the history of language works that way.
Research is telling us that there's a range of skills that are very important for reading, and some skills are more important for decoding, other skills are more important for reading comprehension. For example, phonological awareness has been shown repeatedly to be a strong predictor of children's decoding skills. Therefore, measuring phonological awareness early will give you important and valuable information about what the kids can do or whether they might be at risk for future decoding difficulties. The same way, vocabulary is typically more strongly related to reading comprehension, just like listening comprehension. And therefore, if we assess the kids early on in these early language and cognitive skills, then we have a good estimate of their future reading comprehension performance before they start learning to read and before they start answering questions from the text that they have read. So we can estimate the risk of children experiencing future reading difficulties by having their performance in these early cognitive linguistic skills such as phonological awareness and vocabulary. Therefore, assessing them in these skills is very important. Later on, when the kids start reading, then we have to test them on decoding as well as on reading comprehension later on. So depending on how much time we have available as teachers and how much screening we want to do, we can certainly add more tasks into the group of tasks that we already have.
If I may add to that, I would say that it would be very important for grade 1 teachers to know the vocabulary starting level of their incoming students. Because it is possible that some of those students don't have the necessary vocabulary to understand the basic instruction. And in those instances, you want to make sure that they understand what you tell them.
We already have schools in Alberta that once they identify their students as having difficulties in decoding or reading comprehension, the teachers explore further the root of the decoding or the reading comprehension difficulty, which often leads them to test phonological awareness or vocabulary as possible causes to the decoding or reading comprehension difficulty. So this is not uncommon. This is actually good practice in schools, that once the teachers identify that their students have some type of reading difficulties, they go and check further what is the cause so that they can then tailor instruction to the needs of the children that they are struggling.
Well, typically in the multi-tier system of instruction, the whole classroom instruction is already supposed to target these basic skills. Most children will learn them very easily, very quickly, but then you will have a smaller group of children who will need more intensive instruction on those skills. Now, typically the second level of where we go into interventions you're working with a small group of children rather than individual children. And there is evidence that you can work with groups of 3 or 4 quite effectively. And so you don't necessarily need to go directly into one-on-one. However, you will also have, not in every classroom, but definitely in every school, you will also have children who need very intensive one-on-one instruction. And with those children, you really need extra resources, because a teacher in the classroom cannot be offering intensive one-on-one intervention to one child while the other children should also be taught. So you now need someone else to come to the room, or the child work somewhere else. So that's how I would look at it, that you go from whole classroom instruction to small group instruction to individual instruction. And if you do the whole classroom instruction really well, you will have very few kids that need that small group instruction. And if you do that very well, you may not have any children that need individual instruction.
The intervention study that we have conducted here with 4 school divisions in Alberta, helping 365 children, was a small group reading intervention with 3 to 4 children in each group. And the intervention was delivered by trained teachers or trained educational assistants. So it's also very important to add that as you go to from the first level of classroom instruction to smaller group instruction and then to one-on-one instruction, you need more specialized trained personnel to deliver the intervention with fidelity. The growth depends on many different factors, and we need to keep these factors into account when we measure the growth of the children after they participate in some kind of intervention. For example, shorter interventions do not necessarily lead to better outcomes, even though we want the kids to benefit and be out of the at-risk zone as quickly as possible. For example, we have systematic reviews showing that you need at least 30 hours of instruction to start seeing some significant effects of reading interventions to children. We also have evidence that suggests that small groups of 3 to 4 children have better outcomes than groups of 5 to 8 children, even though some reading intervention programs may suggest that they can be used also with larger groups of children. Therefore, the growth that we should be expecting depends on many factors that we have to take into account, and also it depends on the intensity of the intervention that you will be providing to the children. For example, the Alberta Education has given schools 80 lessons and they ask them to implement them 4 times a week. This means it is an intensive intervention that lasts for at least 16 to 18 weeks. This is enough time to see some effects, because the evidence we have from different intervention studies, even conducted here in Alberta, they have shown that 80% of the kids can benefit and be out of the at-risk zone if they get this kind of intensity. If we look at the examples of successful school divisions in moving the needle on literacy within their school division, it shows that they have come up with a plan and a structure where they trained their classroom teachers on evidence-based practices, including the content of the new English language arts curriculum, and they have given them the right tools to support their students who might be struggling by providing differentiated instruction within the larger classroom. But they also have specialized staff, like special education teachers, that are providing small group pull-out intervention for the children that are struggling or not benefiting from good quality classroom instruction. If you have this structure in place, by grade 3 you should be having less than 10%, and in many cases in school divisions here in Alberta we know that they have less than 5% of struggling kids that continue to provide support to. And actually many provinces are looking at Alberta, how we are doing it here, how some of the school divisions have been very successful in addressing the learning losses of their students, particularly during COVID, and they are learning and using some of these practices in their provinces.
For the most up-to-date information about the provincial screening assessments, please refer to the Provincial Assessment Hub on new.learnalberta.ca. Any further questions can be directed to litnumscreening@gov.ab.ca.